Just absolutely horrible. Absolutely horrible. We got Browns insiders basically wanting and rooting for Todd Monken to be fired because he's moving forward with Shedeur Sanders as the quarterback. This is crazy. The man hasn't even coached a game yet.
The man hasn't coached a single game yet, hasn't even gone through his first draft, and Cleveland Browns insiders are already calling for Todd Monken's head, not because of his coaching record, not because of any failures on the field, but because he believes in Shedeur Sanders as his quarterback. This is the kind of dysfunction that destroys franchises before they even get started.
That want to see Todd Monken fail, not because they have this disdain for Todd Monken, but because they have disdain for Shedeur Sanders, and Todd Monken is in support of Shedeur Sanders. So he got to get the axe too. They're not playing games. Anybody can get it. This is crazy. The man hasn't even started coaching a game yet.
Let's be crystal clear about what's happening here. There's a coordinated effort among certain Browns reporters and media figures to sabotage Todd Monken's tenure before it begins. They don't have personal beef with Monken himself. Their target is Shedeur Sanders. And since Monken supports Sanders, he's collateral damage. Anyone who stands with Sanders gets the treatment. This isn't journalism. This is agenda-driven coverage masquerading as analysis.
I think Todd is a really good offensive football coach. I think he's been a really good offensive football coach for a long time. I think there are two different ways that this could potentially go as I think about the archetype of coach that Todd is and how this season might play out. The best case scenario, and I've made this comparison since he got hired, I think if you're a Browns fan, the best way that this can work out is that this is like Bruce Arians 2.0, where you have a guy that is a longtime assistant, waited for his chance, and surprises some people in terms of how good of a head coach he ends up being in his 60s.
Robert Mays from The Athletic laid out the blueprint on Cleveland's longest-running sports radio show. Listen to how he frames this. He starts with compliments about Monken being a good offensive coach with a long track record, classic setup before the hit piece. Then he presents two scenarios. Best case, Monken becomes Bruce Arians 2.0, a longtime assistant who finally gets his shot in his 60s and surprises everyone. Worst case, he's a placeholder hire, an interstitial coach for a bad team, gone within a year while they search for their real head coach. Notice how Mays structures this. He gives himself cover by acknowledging both possibilities, but then watch what he does next.
Kind of interstitial hires for a bad team where you're hiring Todd Monken as a step to hiring your head coach that's going to be here as you really kind of pull yourself out of the muck. And I don't know which one of it. I don't know which one of those it is. If you told me that this was a one-year thing and they're looking for a head coach again next year, just based on the current state of the roster, the level of quarterback play they're going to get, that wouldn't surprise me at all. But I have enough respect for Todd Monken where I absolutely can see the other path working out, where the offense is a little bit better than we expected. You're maximizing the players on that side of the ball, and you can talk.
Here's the kill shot. Mays says if someone told him this was a one-year situation and the Browns are looking for another head coach next season, he wouldn't be surprised at all. Based on what? The current state of the roster and the level of quarterback play they're going to get. He's already written off the season before training camp, already declared the quarterback situation hopeless, already set the narrative that Monken's failure is inevitable. This is how media members plant seeds. They present speculation as reasonable analysis, dress up their opinions as objective observations, and create self-fulfilling prophecies. If enough influential voices keep saying Monken's doomed, guess what happens when the team struggles early? The pressure becomes unbearable.
Talk yourself into the idea of, okay, when we get a quarterback in here, we do think this is the right guy to oversee that process.
I think every radio show host in this city, or at least on this station, I think I would be willing to imagine, you can never say 100%, I'd be willing to imagine 98+% of Browns fans would agree it would be very silly to go through all this rigmarole. Daryl is in for tone today, by the way, to go through all this stuff that's been going on here where you took a month to find a head coach, which fine, that might be normal, but we were going through all of it with all these young guys. We ended up picking a 60-year-old head coach. You end up picking a head coach to just have him for 1 year.
The radio hosts push back, and rightfully so. They point out how absurd it would be to go through a month-long coaching search, hire a 60-year-old first-time head coach, keep the same general manager, maintain the same core roster pieces, and then fire him after one season. That's organizational malpractice. That's the kind of instability that keeps franchises in perpetual rebuilding mode. But here's what makes this conversation revealing. The hosts are trying to be optimistic, trying to give Monken a fair shot, and even they can't escape the gravitational pull of this narrative. They're already discussing the conditions under which he'd get fired. 5 or 6 wins, terrible offense, no progress shown. They're mapping out his failure before he's called his first play.
The Waterboy fine. Ever since that Rob Chudzinski deal went down, if they like to overcorrect mistakes, the Browns, ownership.
This is true.
They held on to Kevin for a longer period of time. They gave Hugh more time than what any of us wanted to give him.
They hit the eject button quickly on Freddie Kitchens. They hit the eject button quickly on...
Freddie was warranted. Let's call it what it is.
I agree. I'm just saying, though, like, yeah, they tend to find themselves caught between moving on quick.
Now we get to the real issue driving all of this, the quarterback position, and specifically the Sanders family. One of the hosts brings up the elephant in the room. It's a very powerful family. They reference the 5-year rule change for draft picks that many believe the Browns pushed for specifically to draft Shedeur Sanders. Then comes the comparison that makes everyone uncomfortable. John Elway. Remember what happened there? Elway refused to play for the Baltimore Colts after they drafted him first overall in 1983. He didn't want to play for head coach Frank Kush, who had a reputation for brutal coaching methods. Elway forced a trade to Denver instead. The implication here is obvious. If the Sanders family doesn't like the coaching situation in Cleveland, they have the leverage to force Shedeur elsewhere.
Coordinator, Vic Fangio was a 6-year-old coordinator. I thought Vic Fangio got railroaded, and he did. He was in and out very quickly in Denver.
Right.
A worse case scenario would be David Culley, who was a 64-year-old. I don't know if he was ever a coordinator. They made him a head coach, and they tried to say the nice things about him, but it was basically, you're here as a placeholder until we can get our affairs in order about all this stuff and move on.
The host acknowledged multiple scenarios. Maybe the Sanders family likes Monken. Maybe they're fine with the situation, but they've already introduced doubt. They've already suggested that this powerful family might decide the coaching staff isn't good enough for their son. And if that happens, what's Cleveland supposed to do? Burn draft capital on a quarterback whose family doesn't want him there? This is the leverage game that's being played behind the scenes. Media members are floating these scenarios publicly, testing reactions, seeing how the narratives land. And every time someone mentions the Sanders family's power, it reinforces the idea that they're calling the shots, not the Browns organization.
But if we don't think that this team's going to be very great, if we think it's going to be a 5 to 6 win team, Daryl's willing to say 8.
I'm just kidding.
Daryl's the positive one on this show. If he wins 8 games, he's staying. Like, that's fine. But if they win 5 or 6 games, the offense is still terrible. Like, yeah, if you haven't shown any progress, and I'm going to bring the other thing in, depending on what you want to do at the quarterback position, that's a very powerful family.
Here's where it gets even more cynical. The hosts start discussing the timeline. The new stadium in Brook Park opens for the 2029 season. That's 4 seasons from now. 2025, 2026, 2027, 2028, then the grand opening in 2029. One host flatly states he's convinced Monken won't be the head coach when that stadium opens. He doesn't see Monken making it through 3 full seasons. Think about what that means. They're not even giving him a chance to build something. They're treating his hiring as a temporary measure, a bridge to the real coach who will lead the team into their new stadium era. That's the ultimate disrespect for a 60-year-old coach who spent decades earning this opportunity.
Point, because we all watch the NFL, we all know how the league works, man. You all know it.
Todd Monken's not going to be the head coach when they open the stadium in Brook Park. I'm convinced of that. I don't see him being here.
Really?
I don't see Todd Monken being the head coach when they open that.
Boy, I was
stadium.
calling you Mr. Positive. All of a sudden, I don't know if that's Mr. Positive. That's 3 years from now, Daryl. 2029, right?
4 seasons.
4 seasons.
Yeah,
Wait a
4
minute.
seasons from now.
They open it in the 29 season.
Yeah.
Correct.
26,
So the
the 27, the
27,
28,
yeah.
and then the 29.
Well, yeah, but there's 3 seasons till season 4, so it's 3 years. 3 seasons.
He'll get
so
3
he would be going
seasons.
into his 4th season.
Right. I don't think he gets to a
Daryl does
4th
not.
season.
Now let's examine the pattern here, because this isn't unique to Cleveland. This is how modern sports media operates, especially when certain players or families are involved. The coverage becomes less about objective analysis and more about narrative warfare. Different factions push their preferred storylines, leak information to friendly reporters, and use media platforms to apply pressure on decision makers. The Browns have a documented history of overreacting to criticism. After the Rob Chudzinski disaster, where they fired a coach after just one season, they've oscillated between giving coaches too much time and pulling the trigger too quickly. They held on to Hugh Jackson longer than anyone wanted. They ejected Freddie Kitchens after 1 year, though that was warranted given the dysfunction. They're sensitive to media narratives because Cleveland's sports media environment is intense and unforgiving. So when influential voices like Robert Mays start floating the 1-year placeholder theory, that's not idle speculation, that's pressure. That's creating an environment where ownership starts second-guessing their decision before the season even starts. That's making it easier to justify a quick hook if things go south early. And here's the thing about self-fulfilling prophecies in sports. If everyone expects you to fail, if the media is already writing your obituary, if your own beat reporters are predicting your demise, that affects everything. It affects how players respond to your coaching. It affects how ownership supports you through adversity. It affects whether you get the benefit of the doubt when things go wrong. Todd Monken is walking into a situation where significant portions of Cleveland's media have already decided he's not the long-term answer. Not because of anything he's done, not because of his track record as an offensive coordinator, but because he's attached to a quarterback prospect that certain people have decided they don't want. That's the reality he's facing. The Shedeur Sanders debate has become so toxic, so polarizing, that it's poisoning everything around it. Reasonable people can disagree about whether he's worth a top draft pick. Reasonable people can debate his NFL readiness, his arm strength, his decision-making under pressure, but what's happening here goes beyond reasonable debate. This is personal. This is tribal. This is people choosing sides and then working backward to justify their positions. Some of this traces back to Deion Sanders. Love him or hate him, Coach Prime is one of the most polarizing figures in sports. His approach at Colorado generated massive attention, huge ratings, and intense criticism. People who love his confidence and swagger defend everything he does. People who see him as arrogant and self-promotional attack everything associated with him, including his sons. Shedeur becomes a proxy for all the feelings people have about Deion. That's unfair to Shedeur, who by all accounts is a talented quarterback with legitimate NFL potential. But fair doesn't matter in narrative warfare. What matters is perception, momentum, and which side controls the conversation. Right now, the anti-Sanders faction in Cleveland's media seems to have the upper hand. They're setting the terms of the debate. They're framing Monken's support for Sanders as a liability rather than a coaching decision. The comparison to Vic Fangio and David Culley is instructive. Fangio was 61 when Denver hired him as head coach in 2019. He went 19-30 over 3 seasons and got fired. Culley was 65 when Houston hired him in 2021. He went 4-13 in his only season and got dumped immediately. Both were experienced coordinators who got late career head coaching opportunities with struggling franchises. Both were treated as placeholders, whether officially or not. Is that Monken's destiny? Maybe, but it shouldn't be predetermined by media narratives before he's coached a single game. The Browns hired him knowing the roster situation. They hired him knowing the quarterback uncertainty. They hired him understanding the rebuild ahead. If they didn't believe in him for the long term, why hire him at all? Why not go with a younger coordinator who fits the timeline better? Unless, of course, the Sanders family influence is real. Unless the Browns are positioning themselves to draft Shedeur and want a coach who's already on board with that plan. In which case, Monken's job security is directly tied to how Shedeur performs. If Shedeur succeeds, Monken stays. If Shedeur struggles, they both go. That's the unspoken arrangement that might be in place here. Which brings us back to the core issue. The Browns are letting external factors drive internal decisions. They're allowing media narratives and family dynamics and public pressure to influence their coaching and personnel choices. That's how dysfunctional organizations operate. That's how you end up with constant turnover, no continuity, and perpetual mediocrity. So here's what we're watching unfold in real time. A 60-year-old coach who's earned his opportunity is being undermined before his first training camp. Media members are openly speculating about his firing timeline. Radio hosts are discussing the conditions that would trigger his dismissal. And all of this is happening because he supports a quarterback prospect that certain people have decided to oppose. Todd Monken deserves better than this. Whether you think Shedeur Sanders is the answer or not, whether you believe the Browns made the right hire or not, a first-time head coach deserves the chance to actually coach before we write him off. He deserves a fair evaluation based on performance, not predetermined narratives. But that's not how this works anymore. That's not how modern sports media operates. Narratives get established early, often before anyone takes the field, and those narratives become reality through repetition and reinforcement. If enough people keep saying Monken's doomed, eventually ownership starts believing it too. Eventually the pressure becomes too much. Eventually the prophecy fulfills itself. The question is whether Monken can overcome this. Whether he can block out the noise, coach his team, develop his quarterback, whoever that ends up being, and prove the doubters wrong. It's possible. Bruce Arians did it. Other late career coaches have succeeded against long odds. But it requires organizational support, roster talent, and some luck along the way. Right now, Monken has none of those things secured. He's got a roster in transition, a quarterback situation in flux, and a media environment actively rooting against him. That's a tough starting position for any coach, let alone one getting his first head coaching opportunity at 60. So pay attention to how this unfolds. Watch how the narratives shift as the season progresses. Notice which media members are fair in their criticism and which ones are pushing agendas, and ask yourself this: if Todd Monken gets fired after 1 or 2 seasons, will it be because he failed as a coach, or because the environment was poisoned against him from the start? That's the real story here, not whether Monken's a good coach or whether Shedeur Sanders is worth drafting. The real story is how media narratives, family influence, and organizational dysfunction combine to sabotage people before they ever get a fair chance. And Cleveland Browns fans have seen this movie before. They know how it ends. The only question is whether this time will be any different.